The drive to Olivia's family estate felt longer than I'd imagined. We had left the city hours ago, and now the road seemed to twist endlessly through thick forests. Autumn had turned the leaves into a blazing patchwork of orange and red, the kind of scenery you only see in postcards. But as the daylight faded, those bright colors seemed to lose their charm, turning the landscape into something darker, something more isolating. Olivia sat quietly beside me, her gaze fixed on the road ahead. She hadn't said much since we left, and honestly, I couldn't blame her. This was the first time she'd been back to the estate since her father passed away. I figured the memories were too painful, but she insisted it was time. After all, this trip was meant to be a retreat, a peaceful weekend getaway for the four of us, far from the chaos of our lives in the city. I tried to lighten the mood, flashing her a grin. Well, if we were looking to get away from it all, mission accomplished. We're officially in the middle of nowhere. She didn't smile, just gave a small nod. I couldn't tell if it was the house she was dreading or something else. To be fair, I hadn't been out here before either, but from the way she'd talked about the place, I was expecting something grand, maybe even cozy in that old-timey family estate kind of way. What we pulled up to wasn't exactly that. It was nearly dark when we arrived, and the house, or mansion, whatever you wanted to call it, loomed ahead like something out of a Gothic novel. The wooden beams that held it together looked weathered, creaking under the weight of time. Vines had overtaken the stone foundation, and the windows stared back at us like hollow eyes. "Whoa," I muttered, cutting the engine. Behind us, Emily and Jake pulled up in their own car, and I heard Emily gasp as she stepped out. "Liv, this place is huge," she said, looking up at the dark structure. Jake, less impressed, gave a low whistle. "Looks haunted." I grinned, trying to keep the mood light. "Come on, it's just rustic charm. Right, Liv?" She gave me a weak smile, but I could see something flicker behind her eyes. Maybe coming back here wasn't such a great idea after all. We unloaded the bags and made our way inside. The front door creaked, like really creaked, when I pushed it open, and the smell of musty air hit us immediately. Dust had settled on everything, from the high wooden beams to the grand staircase in the center of the entryway. It was like stepping back in time to a place that had been forgotten, left to the elements. "This place is intense," Emily said, looking around with wide eyes. "But kinda cool, in a creepy way." "Definitely creepy," Jake added, running his fingers over the dust-covered railing. I shot him a look. "You're not helping, man." We set our stuff down and spent the next hour unpacking, settling into the various rooms of the house. Olivia didn't say much, but I could tell she was on edge. I tried to brush it off. The house was old. Sure, it made noises, but that was just part of the charm, right? By the time we sat down for dinner, the fire was crackling in the fireplace, casting a warm glow over the dim room. We laughed, shared stories, and for a while, it actually felt like we'd left the weight of the world behind. But even as we sat together, I couldn't shake this weird feeling. The kind of feeling you get when someone's watching you. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, I was half asleep when I heard it. A faint creaking sound from upstairs. At first I thought I'd imagined it, but then it happened again. Slow. Deliberate. Too deliberate to be just the house settling. "Did you hear that?" Olivia whispered beside me, her voice barely audible in the dark. I groaned, half awake. "It's just the house. Old places like this make noises, Liv." But I wasn't so sure. I didn't want to freak her out, though, so I kept my doubts to myself. We lay there in silence, but I could feel her tension. It was like the house was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. I must have fallen asleep at some point because the next thing I knew, Olivia was shaking me awake. "Greg, there's someone outside." "What?" I rubbed my eyes, trying to shake off the fog of sleep. "What are you talking about?" "I saw them," she whispered, her voice trembling. There are people standing in the trees." Her words jolted me awake. I sat up and grabbed the flashlight from the nightstand. "Stay here. I'll check it out." She shook her head wide-eyed. "No, I'm coming with you." I couldn't exactly argue with that. Together, we crept downstairs, trying not to make too much noise. The wooden floors creaked under our feet, and I couldn't help but feel like every sound we made echoed through the house. When we got to the front door, we found Emily and Jake already there, both of them looking pale and on edge. "We heard something too," Jake said, his voice tight. "Figured it was worth checking out." Great. So it wasn't just Olivia. I opened the door slowly, the cold night air rushing in as I stepped outside. The wind had picked up, rustling the trees at the edge of the property. I shined the flashlight across the yard, into the dark woods. For a moment, I saw nothing but shadows. But then, there. 2 figures standing just beyond the tree line. My heart skipped a beat. One of them wore some kind of mask, something rough and leathery stitched together. The other had a face that looked almost porcelain. They didn't move. They just stood there, watching us. "Locals," I muttered, trying to keep my voice steady. Probably just messing with us. But Olivia wasn't convinced. Neither was I, if I'm being honest. We stood there for what felt like forever, but the figures didn't move. Eventually, I waved the flashlight one last time and saw nothing. They were gone. "Let's go back inside," I said, my voice low. "Probably just some kids messing around." We shut the door behind us, but I could feel it. The tension thick in the air. Olivia wouldn't let it go, and honestly, neither could I. Something was off. Way off. The house, the land, everything about this place felt wrong, like it was hiding something. And I couldn't shake the feeling that we were about to find out exactly what. The next morning, the house felt different. I couldn't quite place it. Maybe it was the light creeping through the old windows or the sound of birds outside. But something had shifted. It wasn't just the house, though. Olivia was quieter than usual, and every so often I'd catch her looking out the window like she was waiting for something. I tried not to bring up what we saw last night. Probably just some local kids trying to spook us, right? After breakfast, we decided to explore the grounds. It was too nice a day to stay cooped up inside, and we needed something to shake off the eerie vibe that had settled over the estate. I suggested a walk through the woods, and everyone agreed, though I noticed Olivia hesitate. "You okay?" I asked as we grabbed our jackets by the door. She forced a smile. "Yeah, I'm fine. Just didn't sleep well." I didn't push it. I figured some fresh air would do her good, maybe get her mind off those figures in the trees. I still couldn't explain that part, but the rational side of me wanted to believe it was just a prank. Nothing more. The woods surrounding the estate were beautiful in that raw, untamed way. Tall pines stretched toward the sky, their branches swaying with the cool breeze. The crunch of leaves beneath our boots filled the silence as we ventured deeper, the house disappearing from view. It was peaceful out here, the kind of calm you don't get in the city. But there was still something off. "I read once that there were old hunting grounds around here," Jake said as we walked. He had a map on his phone, tracing the lines of the property. "This whole area used to be part of some big game reserve back in the day." Olivia shot me a glance, but I pretended not to notice. Her family had owned this land for generations, and while she never talked much about its history, I got the sense that it held more secrets than she let on. As we walked, the path grew narrower, the trees closer together. Every now and then, I'd see something out of the corner of my eye, something that didn't quite belong. An old fence, rusted and half-buried in the underbrush, or a small clearing where the grass seemed darker, like it had been scorched by something long ago. It was Jake who noticed the first real sign something was wrong. We had stumbled upon a small clearing, a perfect circle of grass in the middle of the woods. It looked unnatural, like someone, or something, had intentionally cleared it. "Check this out," Jake said, crouching near the center of the clearing. He picked up a rock, turning it over in his hand. "This isn't just a clearing. These are stones. Someone put them here." I stepped closer, frowning. He was right. Large stones, some half sunken into the ground, formed a ring around the clearing. They were old, worn smooth by time and weather, but there was no mistaking that they had been placed there. "Looks like some kind of ritual site," Emily said with a nervous laugh, but no one else joined in. Olivia stood a little further back, her arms crossed, watching us. "My dad used to tell me stories about the land," she said quietly. "He said there were things we weren't supposed to talk about. Strange things." I felt a chill run down my spine. "Like what?" She shook her head, almost like she regretted saying anything at all. "Just old stories, superstitions, nothing real." But it didn't feel like nothing. We kept walking, and I could feel the mood shift. The laughter and light banter from earlier had faded. Everyone was quieter now, the tension building. I tried to shake it off. This was supposed to be a fun weekend after all, not a ghost hunt. Still, there were signs. Subtle at first, but they were there. The deeper we went, the more they appeared. An old trap, rusted and broken, half hidden beneath the leaves. A tree with strange carvings in the bark, symbols I didn't recognize. Emily snapped a photo, joking about showing it to her followers later, but her voice wavered. "What do you think that means?" she asked, pointing to the carvings. They were rough, almost primitive, like someone had gouged them into the tree with a sharp object. Triangles, spirals, strange lines that seemed to intertwine like tangled roots. "I have no idea," I said, my voice tight. "Probably just some old hiker's graffiti." But Olivia didn't seem so sure. She stepped closer to the tree, staring at the carvings like they were familiar. "I've seen these before," she murmured. Jake raised an eyebrow. "Where?" She didn't answer, just backed away, clearly unsettled. I was about to ask her more, but then we found something that stopped all of us in our tracks. It was another clearing, but this one was different. In the center stood a wooden cross, about 6 feet tall, half rotted and covered in moss. At first, I thought it was some old religious marker, maybe something left behind by settlers. But then I saw the bones. They were scattered around the base of the cross, half buried in the dirt. Animal bones, I told myself. They had to be animal bones. "Okay, this is getting weird," Emily said, her voice small. Jake stepped closer, kicking the dirt near the bones. "Looks like some kind of old shrine." Olivia's face had gone pale. "We need to go back," she said abruptly, turning toward the path. "No way, this is cool," Jake argued. "Come on, we can—" "I said we need to go back!" Olivia snapped, her voice more urgent now. That's when I felt it. The hair on the back of my neck stood up, and a cold breeze blew through the trees, colder than it should have been. I looked around, suddenly aware of how quiet it had become. No birds, no wind, just silence. And that's when I saw it. In the shadows, just beyond the trees, movement. A figure half hidden in the underbrush. I blinked, and it was gone. "Greg?" Olivia's voice broke through my thoughts. I shook my head. Yeah, let's head back." We retraced our steps, and the tension didn't leave us for a second. The woods felt different now, darker, more menacing. I couldn't stop thinking about that figure, that flash of movement I'd seen. I wanted to tell myself it was just my imagination, but deep down, I knew better. When we finally emerged from the trees and saw the house again, I felt a wave of relief. But as we stepped onto the porch, something caught my eye. A small object, barely noticeable, left on the ground near the door. A mask. Not just any mask, though. It was leather, stitched together with crude, uneven seams. The same kind of mask we'd seen on that figure last night. I bent down, my heart pounding in my chest, and picked it up. The leather felt rough under my fingers, almost damp. I turned it over in my hands, and a sense of dread washed over me. They were here, I whispered. Olivia stared at the mask, her face pale. She didn't need to ask who I meant. We both knew. Whoever or whatever they weren't just watching us anymore. They were getting closer. I stood on the porch, staring down at the leather mask in my hand, my pulse racing. The mask wasn't just a warning, it was a promise. Whoever had been watching us last night was closer than we thought. They had been here, at the house, creeping around while we slept. I looked at Olivia. Her face was pale, her eyes locked on the mask like it was something diseased. "We need to leave," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Leave?" Emily stammered. "We can't just—" "They're here!" Olivia snapped, cutting her off. "If we stay, they'll—" She didn't finish, but we all knew what she meant. The memory of those figures standing in the woods, those strange masks, was burned into our minds. The fact that one of those masks was now lying at our feet only made it worse. Whoever they weren't messing around. "Okay," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Let's just get in the cars and go." We rushed back inside, scrambling for our bags, grabbing whatever we could. My hands were shaking as I shoved clothes into a duffel bag. Olivia was already packed, moving frantically from room to room, checking windows, locking doors. But the growing sense of panic in her eyes told me one thing. It was too late. When we made it back to the cars, my stomach dropped. Both vehicles sat there, tires slashed, windows cracked. I ran my hands over the ruined rubber, disbelief turning into a cold, creeping fear. Whoever these people were, they had planned this. They knew exactly what they were doing. No, Jake muttered, pacing around his car. "We're screwed." "We can still walk out," I said, trying to think through the rising panic. "It's a long hike, but we can follow the road until we get to the main highway." But Olivia shook her head. "They're out there, watching us, waiting." I didn't want to believe it, but deep down I knew she was right. "Then what the hell do we do?" Emily asked, her voice shaking. "We go back inside," Olivia said. "We barricade the doors. We survive the night." Her words sent a chill down my spine, but they were the only ones that made sense. We couldn't run. We couldn't drive away. All we could do was hope the house could keep them out. The four of us rushed back inside, slamming the door shut behind us. We bolted every lock, moved furniture in front of the windows, did everything we could to seal ourselves inside. The house was old, but it was sturdy. It had survived years of abandonment. Maybe it could survive one more night. But the fear inside me wouldn't leave. I could still feel those eyes watching us. Could still picture those figures in the woods, standing there, waiting. Hours passed. The sun began to set, and the house grew darker. The fire crackled weakly in the fireplace, the only source of light as the shadows grew long around us. No one spoke. No one dared to. Every creak of the house made us jump. The wind outside picked up, rattling the windows. I kept glancing at Olivia, her face pale and tense. She hadn't said much since we barricaded ourselves in, but I could tell she was on edge, more than usual. Then came the first sound, a soft thud, from upstairs. All of us froze. Jake glanced at me, his face pale. "You heard that, right?" I nodded, standing slowly. My heart was pounding in my chest, so loud I thought it might drown out the sound. The thud came again, louder this time. "Someone's inside," Emily whispered, terror clear in her voice. I grabbed the flashlight from the table and gestured for them to stay back. Olivia grabbed my arm as I moved toward the staircase. "Don't," she whispered, her eyes wide with fear. "They're in the house." "I have to check," I said, swallowing hard. I had to know what we were up against, but as I took the first step, my legs felt heavy, like I was dragging myself toward something I didn't want to see. The stairs creaked under my weight as I climbed slowly, my flashlight shaking in my hands. When I reached the landing, I paused, holding my breath. The hallway was empty, the shadows thick and heavy. but the door to one of the bedrooms was cracked open, just enough to make my skin crawl. I approached, hard in my throat, and pushed the door open with a trembling hand. Inside, the room was dark, but I could just make out something on the bed. Something that wasn't there before. Emily. Her body was laid out on the mattress, but her neck was twisted at an impossible angle, her eyes wide open and staring at the ceiling. I took a step back, the shock hitting me like a punch to the gut. Her throat had been slit, the blood soaking the sheets beneath her. The mask, the leather mask, was draped over her face. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. I stumbled out of the room, gripping the banister for support as nausea swept over me. "They're inside!" I shouted, panic surging through me as I bolted down the stairs. Jake and Olivia met me at the bottom, their faces contorted with fear. "Where's Emily?" Jake asked. But I couldn't get the words out. I didn't have to. He took one look at me and knew. No. No, no, no. He rushed toward the stairs, but I grabbed him, pulling him back. "She's gone, man. They killed her." Olivia's hands flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with horror. I could see her trying to hold back the tears, trying to keep herself together. But the fear was overwhelming, and I could see the cracks forming. "We need to get out of here," Jake stammered, pulling at his hair. "We have to..." The front door burst open with a loud crash, sending splinters of wood flying through the room. One of the figures, the one in the porcelain mask, stepped inside, his head slowly turning toward us. Behind him, another shadow loomed. The leather mask, the same one that had been draped over Emily's face. Jake didn't hesitate. He ran for the back door, throwing it open and disappearing into the darkness. Olivia screamed, grabbing my arm, but I was frozen, staring at the masked figure as he stepped closer. "They're going to kill us," Olivia whispered, her voice shaking with terror. I grabbed her hand, pulling her toward the kitchen. "Come on, we need to..." But we didn't make it. One of the masked figures lunged, grabbing Olivia by the arm and dragging her back. She screamed, kicking and flailing, but his grip was too strong. I turned, desperation taking over, but I was too late. The knife flashed, and blood sprayed across the floor. Olivia crumpled to the ground, her eyes wide with shock as she clutched her throat, blood pouring through her fingers. "No!" I screamed, rushing toward her, but the porcelain mask stepped in front of me, blocking my path. His head tilted, as if studying me, before he raised the knife. I dodged, adrenaline surging through me as I bolted for the back door, leaving Olivia's lifeless body behind. I didn't have a choice. If I stayed, I was dead. The wood swallowed me whole as I ran, branches slashing at my face, my breath coming in ragged gasps. Somewhere in the distance, I heard Jake screaming. I couldn't tell if it was from pain or terror, but the worst part was the laughter. The soft, chilling laughter that followed me through the trees. They weren't hunting us. They were playing with us. The clearing was silent, save for the crunch of leaves under the masked figure's boots. I couldn't move. I couldn't even think. My body was frozen in place, knees digging into the wet earth, staring at Jake's mutilated body hanging from the cross. His blood pooled beneath him, soaking into the dark soil, feeding the land with whatever ancient hunger it held. My mind raced, but the horror was too much. Every nerve in my body screamed at me to run, but I knew there was nowhere to go. The figures stepped closer, their faces obscured by those terrible masks. The one in the leather mask moved with a slow, deliberate gait, like it was savoring the fear radiating off me. The porcelain masked one tilted its head, watching me with a kind of calm cruelty that turned my stomach. I had never felt more like prey in my life. I forced myself to stand, legs trembling beneath me. My breath was ragged, my throat raw from the screams I didn't remember making. I scanned the clearing, desperate for some kind of escape, but they were closing in, their movements coordinated, methodical. I had to do something. Anything. My eyes darted to the ground, where a jagged stone jutted out of the dirt, half covered in blood. I didn't hesitate. In one quick motion, I grabbed the stone and swung wildly, aiming for the porcelain-masked figure nearest me. The stone connected with a sickening crunch, and for a split second I thought I had done it. I had hurt one of them. But the figure barely flinched. It staggered back, blood oozing through the cracks in the porcelain. But it didn't go down. Instead, it let out a low, unnatural growl, the sound vibrating through the mask like an animal cornered. The others moved faster now, closing the distance between us. I stumbled backward, the stone slipping from my bloody hands as the porcelain figure reached out, grabbing me by the collar. It yanked me toward it, the force of its grip nearly choking me. I clawed at its hands, trying to break free, but it was too strong. My vision blurred, panic overtaking every thought. And then, without warning, it released me. I fell to the ground, gasping for breath. My hands scrambled to push myself up, but I froze when I saw what the porcelain figure was doing. It wasn't watching me anymore. Its gaze had shifted, focused on something behind me. Slowly, I turned. At the edge of the clearing, emerging from the trees, was a figure I hadn't seen before. It wasn't masked like the others. This one wore no face covering, but its skin was pale, too pale, like it had never seen the sun. Its eyes were black holes, endless and empty. There was something horribly wrong with the way it moved, like it was a shadow, barely tethered to this world. It took slow, deliberate steps into the clearing, and the other masked figures stepped back, almost like they were afraid. I crawled backward, my heart hammering in my chest, as the pale figure glided closer. It didn't speak, didn't make a sound, but its presence was suffocating, filling the air with a heavy, unnatural tension. I could feel its gaze on me, cold and indifferent. And then I understood. This wasn't just about the masked killers. They were nothing more than tools, vessels maybe, serving something far older and more terrifying than I could have imagined. This land, this cursed place, had been feeding for generations, and now it had come for me. I tried to stand, but my legs wouldn't cooperate. The pale figure stopped a few feet away, its head tilting ever so slightly, studying me. Behind it, the masked killers stood still, like puppets waiting for their next command. Then, without warning, the pale figure raised its hand. The air around me grew thick, oppressive. I gasped, clutching at my throat as an invisible force pressed down on me, crushing the breath from my lungs. My vision darkened, spots dancing before my eyes. I was going to die. I struggled, clawing at the dirt beneath me, but there was no escape. The force continued to squeeze, my chest burning as I fought for air. The masked figures remained motionless, watching, their eyes, or what I could see of them, cold and emotionless. Just when I thought the darkness would take me, the force lifted. I collapsed, gasping for breath, my entire body shaking with fear and exhaustion. I didn't understand why I was still alive, why they hadn't finished me. The pale figure leaned in closer, and for the first time, I heard its voice. A whisper, soft but clear, like the wind rustling through the trees. "Run!" It took me a moment to realize it was speaking to me. My body was numb, my mind reeling from the near-death experience. But the word echoed in my head. Run. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a command. I didn't need to be told twice. I scrambled to my feet, adrenaline surging through me. The masked figures didn't move as I bolted toward the trees, sprinting blindly into the woods. My lungs burned, my legs screamed in protest, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. The pale figure's voice still echoed in my ears, haunting me. I didn't know how long I ran. The forest seemed endless, the trees twisting and stretching like they were alive, trying to pull me back. My heart pounded, my mind racing with panic. All I could think about was getting away. Away from that clearing, away from the horrors I had witnessed. Eventually, I broke through the trees and found myself back on the road. My legs gave out, and I collapsed onto the cold asphalt, gasping for air. For a moment, I just lay there, staring up at the sky, unable to believe I had made it out. But the relief was short-lived. In the distance, from deep within the woods, I heard it again. Laughter. Low, soft, but unmistakable. It followed me, echoing through the trees, growing louder with every passing second. They weren't done with me. This land, this thing, wasn't done with me. And I knew, deep down, that no matter how far I ran, I would never escape. The world spun around me as I lay on the cold asphalt, struggling to catch my breath. The laughter, low, haunting, echoed from deep within the forest. It was growing louder, getting closer, and no matter how far I ran, it wasn't letting me go. My heart pounded in my chest, a steady reminder that this nightmare was far from over. I had escaped the estate, left Olivia and Jake and Emily behind, left their bodies to rot in that cursed place. But the land's grip on me hadn't loosened. It wouldn't loosen. I managed to pull myself up, my legs trembling beneath me. The woods loomed on either side of the road like a living, breathing thing, the trees twisting and curling in unnatural ways. Their branches seemed to reach out toward me, as though even the forest was in on this twisted game. But it wasn't the forest that terrified me most. It was what followed. The pale figure, the masked killers, whatever that thing in the clearing was. It wasn't human, and now it had marked me. The laughter echoed again, louder this time, snapping me back to the moment. I stumbled forward, trying to put distance between me and whatever was coming. The road stretched on endlessly, but there was no sign of civilization. No lights, no cars, just the dark stretch of asphalt disappearing into the horizon. And in the shadows, something was following me. I ran. My legs screamed in protest, my breath coming in ragged gasps, but I ran anyway. The air was thick, like it was trying to slow me down, making each step feel like I was running through water. My mind raced, filled with images of Olivia's body, Jake's mutilated corpse. I had survived, but it was only a matter of time before they caught me. I don't know how long I ran. Minutes, hours, time had lost its meaning. But finally, through the trees, I saw it. A light, flickering in the distance, a sign of hope. A cabin? A house? It didn't matter. I could barely breathe as I stumbled toward it, the laughter still chasing me through the darkness. When I reached the clearing, I saw it was a small, decrepit cabin. The windows were shattered, the roof sagging, but there was light inside. Faint, flickering, but unmistakable. Someone was there. Someone who could help me. I didn't think. I didn't hesitate. I threw myself against the door, pounding on it with what little strength I had left. "Help!" I screamed, my voice cracking. "Please, let me in!" The door creaked open, just a crack, and through it, I saw an old man, his face wrinkled and pale in the dim light of the lantern he held. His eyes were wide, filled with fear, but not at me. He was looking past me, into the woods. "They're coming for you," he whispered, his voice hoarse. I shoved the door open, staggering inside, slamming it shut behind me. "Please," I gasped, "you have to help me. There's something in the woods. They killed my friends, The old man shook his head slowly, backing away from me. His eyes never left the door. "You can't stop it," he muttered. "This land, it takes what it wants." I froze. "What do you mean?" His gaze finally met mine, and the emptiness in his eyes sent a chill down my spine. "You're already dead," he said softly. Before I could respond, the door rattled violently, shaking in its frame. The old man flinched, stepping further back into the shadows. I could hear them outside, the soft scrape of footsteps on the porch, the whisper of wind through the broken windows. The masked killers were here. The old man's voice wavered. "You brought them with you." I stumbled backward, my mind reeling, panic overtaking me. I could hear the laughter outside now, so close, so relentless. It was inside my head, twisting my thoughts. warping reality. The door burst open. The leather-masked figure stepped inside, moving with that same slow, deliberate gait, its head tilted as it regarded me. Behind it, the porcelain-masked killer followed, dragging something behind it. Something heavy, wrapped in a tattered sheet. Blood dripped from the fabric, leaving a trail across the floor. I knew what it was before they unwrapped it. Jake. His lifeless eyes stared up at me, his face twisted in agony. His chest had been carved open, his insides spilling out across the floor. But it wasn't just his body. His face. They had skinned him. His features were gone, replaced by nothing but a mass of raw, bleeding flesh. I screamed. I couldn't help it. My body moved on instinct, crashing into the nearest wall, my hands shaking violently as I tried to find something, anything, that could protect me. But there was nothing. The killers stood there, watching, waiting. They had all the time in the world. The old man's voice broke through the madness. "It's their land," he whispered, almost reverently. "You were never meant to leave." Before I could react, the porcelain-masked figure lunged at me. Its hands were cold, impossibly strong, as they closed around my throat. I gasped, clawing at its arms, but it didn't matter. I was no match for it. The world started to blur as darkness closed in around the edges of my vision. My body felt like it was shutting down, giving up. But then, the pale figure stepped inside. It glided into the room, its empty black eyes locking onto mine. The air grew heavy, suffocating. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. This was it. The land had claimed me, and I wasn't getting out. The pale figure approached, standing over me as I lay gasping on the floor. It knelt down, its face inches from mine. I wanted to scream, to fight, but my body wouldn't respond. Its voice was a whisper, soft and soothing, but filled with malice. "You never left." Suddenly the pain hit me. Blinding, excruciating pain that exploded through my body. I looked down and saw it. My chest, ripped open, my insides spilling out onto the floor, just like Jake. I tried to scream, but no sound came. The world around me spun, blood soaking the floor beneath me. The killers standing over me like gods watching their sacrifice. The pale figure smiled, and then the world went black. Months later, the local authorities investigated the disappearance of Greg, Olivia, Emily, and Jake. The estate had long been considered abandoned, an old relic from another time. But when they arrived, they found something no one could explain. The house was empty, untouched. But in the woods, deep in the clearing, they found 4 bodies. Jake, Olivia, Emily, and Greg, tied to crosses, their bodies mutilated beyond recognition. Around them, a circle of stones stood, marking the site of an ancient ritual. The townspeople whispered about the land, about the old stories. Some said the estate had always been cursed, that no one who stepped foot on that property ever truly left. Others claimed it was a tradition, a dark ritual that the land required, a blood price for peace. But one thing was certain: the 4 friends hadn't just disappeared. They had become part of the land, forever. And the laughter, they said, could still be heard at night, echoing through the trees. Thank you all for listening to my stories. If you enjoyed them, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any future videos.